Thanks for supporting the show so far, guys and gals. It puts a big smile on my face. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. If you're on YouTube, please give us a subscription. It helps other people find the podcast.
Soul Calibur 5.
So, welcome back to iHeart Gaming. If you haven't listened to us before, thank you for spending time with us. This episode is going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter. Part of the reason is because the game itself doesn't have much content, but unlike Shadow of the Colossus, which is the lack of content, you can say creates an ambient atmosphere and very artistic, this game was a bit rushed. Also, I took some time off a little bit earlier to train for a race. I did okay. Some people will say I cried, but it's bullshit. I tell you, it's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Anyways, we like video games around here. Today we're talking about Soul Calibur 5. Soul Calibur 6 is around the corner. At the time of this recording, some characters have been leaked. Right now, the most recent leak has been Moxie, the Asian dude with the nunchucks. And we're halfway through 2018. Soul Calibur 6 comes out later this year. I still don't know when, but Soul Calibur 5, the game itself, was published by Bandai Namco, the creators of Tekken. Fun fact, Yoshimitsu, the fighter in Soul Calibur, is also in Tekken. Don't know if it's the same one or his great-great-grandfather or whatever, but cool little tidbit. The game itself was developed by Project Soul, an inside development studio that specifically works on Soul Calibur games. The game's story, however, this is an important tidbit, was developed by CyberConnect 2, and more on them later. I'm going to be a little bit honest with you. I don't know how this episode is going to go, as I'm still learning the whole format of the show and how we're going to do it. But I will let you know that replaying this game and writing the script, I had a lot of fun. Anyways, let me tell you a story about how I got on board with the Soul Calibur train. When Soul Calibur 2 was released, that's when I started playing it. I remember being in 7th or 8th grade, so it was somewhere between 2002 2003. Soul Calibur 2 was released in the fall of 2013. Prior to that, when school was starting back up after summer, I caught a small glimpse of it. I had a GameCube preview disc that showed the trailer of that game and a couple other games. Young Ramiro was so hyped for this game. Like, you have no idea. Because Link, as in the Legend of Zelda Link, was going to be in this game. After the Wind Waker Legend of Zelda entry with cartoon aesthetics, which was totally different from Ocarina of Time, and the concept trailer for the possible graphics that were originally going to be on the GameCube, my body was prepared for a higher quality Link model from the Ocarina of Time series. And I got a little bit of that with Super Smash Bros., but this was different. I was not disappointed. Soul Calibur 2 shipped with not one exclusive character, but 3 exclusive characters. I don't know if this was a result of the Pokemon games being insanely popular at the time, and even the Mega Man Battle Network games, in the sense that there were 2 versions of the same game, but the variance between them was something that nobody has ever really seen done before in a fighting game. During that time, crossover characters were mostly seen in Capcom games, with the ultimate inflection point being Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And Clay Fighter came out way before that, and that had Earthworm Jim, which was an American cartoon, if that means anything to anybody. Gon was in Tekken 3, and Gon was a character from a manga. And also, the best Tekken joke never written was that Tekken 3 was Gone with the Wind. Crossovers were a special moment that they did happen a lot, but not all too often. And the Soul Calibur series, in my opinion, has pushed the envelope twice. The first was with Soul Calibur 2, with the console exclusives of that game. The GameCube version had Link, the Xbox version had Spawn, and the PS2 version received Heihachi. This was unheard of. A console fighter that had 3 exclusive fighters on 3 different systems. To top it off, Soul Calibur 2 is often hailed as the pinnacle of the Soul Calibur series. Not that the other games weren't bad, but they just weren't as accepted as the second game. To top it off, fans really enjoyed the costumes and art direction of the second game compared to some of the other games. Nowadays, guest characters are expected in modern fighting games, but the guests of Soul Calibur 2 at the time seemed so left field, so out of nowhere. And it wasn't the wackiest. I think Soul Calibur 4, and who knows how Bandai Namco, a Japanese company, introduced Darth friggin' Vader, Yoda, and the Secret Apprentice to their guest character roster, but they did. Three guest characters that are literally from a different galaxy. But they did it. Not only did they have 3 guest characters, and on top of the create a character mode, which basically could make any character you wanted, they also had a lot of unique, a lot of guest artists that created some unique looking, anime looking characters. So Calibur 4 was a weird amalgamation, as it also added some other game modifiers that we haven't seen before to that franchise. So Calibur 5 introduced Ezio from the Assassin's Creed series as the guest character. And I remember looking back at that, it was a badass time. Just his character model was something that fit that universe, but was also from a totally different game. Ezio was fairly balanced because he fit the setting just fine. He didn't have the hype of the previous characters, but he did do his job. Back to middle school now. This was the first fighting game I actually delved into. I loved the setting. It was 15th, 16th century Europe. I loved the 3D arena and the weapons-based fighting mechanics. And prior to this franchise, most of the fighting games used bare fists, fightings with some supernatural elements. Think of your Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Street Fighter. They fight mostly using their fists and have some kind of, once again, supernatural element. That just felt really boring to me, and I could never get into those games because of that. Other facets that discouraged me from fighting games was the perception problem, the combo strings, the juggling. Especially Mortal Kombat proved this true to me, which was accentuated by the unknown fatalities when I was a kid that you only heard of but were done to you in the arcades. Just out of nowhere, just fatality. And you only knew them from word of mouth. So it was very difficult to figure out whether something was true or not. However, you throw in some swords, some tacky weapons, and I was hooked. And I didn't know if it was Final Fantasy VII or Devil May Cry or Legend of Zelda or just Nightmare's design. Just throw me a big sword and I like it, I guess. I was deep in the edgelords of early 2000 video games. Oh God, what a way Soul Calibur has come from its tiny openings as Soul Edge with the ridiculous anime as intro. And if you don't believe me, go check it out. To the height of its popularity and back down to the mediocreness that is Soul Calibur 5. And now riding the hype train back up to Soul Calibur 6 at the time of this recording. It's been a roller coaster of emotions. Act 1, mediocre review. I'm going to start off with my review of this game. This game is mostly described as mediocre. I don't think I've ever felt more upset or angry at a game for being mediocre. I wish the game would have been better. I wish the game mechanics were tighter. I wish this game had a great story. However, instead of all that, we got a mediocre game with a bad story. I hate to describe video games this way because I know people spend a lot of time making this game. I know that games don't take a short time to make. They're a product that requires an insane amount of development being poured in. Look at the credit list. It's long. These people spent time, long nights, work for days on end to make this game. To be fair, this game is beautiful. The arenas in-game are gorgeous. If you look at the background, you can see soldiers, monsters, huge mechanical spiders. The later arenas, you can see the astral realm and the sky breaking apart. There's an awesome arena where you fight on a pirate ship, and on the third round, the arena changes. Instead of the deck that you fight on, you fight in the hull of the boat. You can see NPCs in the backgrounds just doing their thing. There are beautiful looking stages. And all this feels undervalued because of this story. I need a few seconds. I'm going to rant about the lackluster story. Previous Soul games haven't had the most easiest to follow story. It isn't difficult like Mortal Kombat's long, convoluted story that I know so little about, and that some guy named Shujinko ruined things for everybody. It isn't easy to follow though. The reason why it's not easy to follow is because previous Soul games followed a canon story that had important plot points, but that the game in the arcade mode provided endings to the characters. These endings didn't have stellar writing or acting. Usually, these endings also didn't provide much in terms of world building or fleshing out the franchise's lore. One character out of the whole roster might have had something world defining, but it also got brushed off by the next game. And this is something that normally happens in fighting games. Fighting games aren't known to have their stellar stories. However, I appreciated the individual arcade stories because it did give you a bigger sense of scale, and it gave you a reason to play through with various characters. Most fighting games now follow this kind of arcade mode story for all of its flaws. Games such as Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, various Mortal Kombats, Tekken, Street Fighter, Guilty Gear, Blaze or Blast Blue, however you pronounce it, SNK vs. Capcom, other SNK games, I think Kung Fu Panda. Look, I'm not a fighting game enthusiast. I like Soul Calibur, and I like Dead or Alive. And I wish Dead or Alive was less bouncy, but hey, what can you do, right? Sometimes you make great fighting game mechanics like Soul Calibur 5 or Dead or Alive 5 and give the game such piss poor presentation and okay features. Now, I've complained for a couple of minutes now, so you gotta be asking yourself right now, is this warranted? Well, for me, it personally is. This whole act is going to be mostly opinionated, but this game should have been better. It doesn't have a museum mode. The online mode is clunky. The arcade mode is chopped, and the story mode doesn't replace it as well. There is a legendary swords mode, but it's just a harder arcade mode. So what am I bitching about? The story mode. Oh yeah. It's that forgettable. That's why I wrote it down. So, there's a named character. His name is Patroclus. He has a sister named Pyrrha. Now, before we go down the anime story of mediocrity, actually the story itself isn't mediocre. It's just plain terrible. The story starts with Patroclus under the order of some guy named Graf Dumas. He ordered to kill Malfested people so that he may get a snippet of information as to go to where the location of his sister is. So already on a hunch, he's just going to kill people because somebody told him to. And he does it too. The first few bites of the game, it's him fighting Malfested people. There isn't any real way of proving who is Malfested either. The game defines Malfested as people whose souls are infested by soulage. And here lies the problem, because short of a line here or there coining Malfested, the game doesn't really define it. And Patroclus doesn't really care to understand it. The way Patroclus understands what Malfested is the same way a 10-year-old is scared, who is scared of anything irrational. Normally this wouldn't be a crazy story mechanic, and plenty of games have evil people. You always have the protagonist and the antagonist. But the problem stems from the definition coming from the artwork and the art book, which was in its own special edition. And that's a serious problem. Hiding any kind of information pertinent to the plot in an art book seems egregious. This isn't a Final Fantasy Ultimania book that complements the game. This is the art book for a fighting game. That being said, fighting games don't always have the most stellar of stories. So back to Patroclus. He seems to go on a malfested murdering spree. He does this until he meets one of the coolest new characters, Zwei. Zwei asks Patroclus if he knows why he is doing what Dumas tells him, and he just angrily disregards him. Then he goes to Dumas and questions him, so Dumas throws him to the side. Patroclus does his own thing and joins Siegfried's militia. And while Patroclo is doing his thing, we do a quick cut to his sister who is being tagged along by Tira. Tira is influencing Patroclo's sister, Pyrrha, into self-defense, even though she is training her to be stronger. This right here makes no sense because it makes Tira come across as ridiculously influential. Once again, just like the Malfested, the story doesn't explain why she has somebody coercing her to do the murders in the name of self-defense. Even if Tira has some kind of hypnosis power, the game does a terrible job putting Pyrrha in a position where she is under that influence. So Patroclo has forfeited murdering people to join Siegfried's army. He joins the army and becomes the wielder of Soul Calibur, miraculously. Meanwhile, his sister is off killing people in self-defense. Great family values here. So, Patroclus is accompanied by Zoe Badass and a newly introduced character, Viola. And the three follow some rumors here and there and eventually meet up with Tira, who is confirmed to be a Malfested. Patroclus reunited with his sister, and Viola literally says something useless. She literally says the sun and the moon cannot rise together. And this writing cannot get any lazier or even more anime-like. As a brat, Patroclus decides that he and his sister are leaving Zwei and Viola. Leaving behind the Schwarzwind, Patroclus and his sister get attacked by Astaroth, who is another plot problem. Astaroth is a Frankenstein monster created by a cult with remnants of Soul Edge. There have been multiple Astaroths. This brand of Astaroth was mass-produced using the core from the old, what's called the Alpha Astaroth. And once again, not a terrible idea, as the old Astaroths seem to get bigger and bigger with each Soul Calibur entry. However, the story itself is never explained. It's not really explained why Astaroth is going after Patroclus. The only way you'll know why or what Astaroth is if you have previous knowledge of this, which is already hard to find. This is also explained in the friggin' art book. It's almost as if the art book should have been integrated into the game. Back to the story. Astaroth is defeated. However, a random Ivy appears through the story. And who knows why she's there, but she heals Patroclus. She makes a comment about Patroclus' Soul Calibur weapon and leaves. Since Patroclus is hurt, Pyrrha must defend the badly hurt Patroclus, who has been in like 15 fights up to this point. Patroclus, who murdered people at the beginning of this game, so she defends Patroclus against a random ass Voldo. Now, are you confused or lost yet? Because this game doesn't know where it's going, and me explaining it doesn't help out. So, plot wounds aside, Patroclus and his sister get some family time together for a bit, which is cool, I guess. And on the way back to Athens, they run into Dumas for this plot twist. He reveals Soul Edge, and turns out he is actually a bad guy, which wasn't just predicted already, but not just any bad guy. The bad guy on the cover of the game. Hold the brakes. Now, I love Nightmare. I love how Nightmare is the evil side of Siegfried. However, this is such a lame plot twist because we knew Dumas was evil. We didn't know that Nightmare had shape-shifting abilities or body hosting abilities, short of Siegfried, nor could he jump from body to body. And where did this twist come from? Nightmare was the dark side of Siegfried, who eventually just became the evil will of the Soul Edge and had a physical manifestation that could transform into a more extreme version of himself. But transforming into an evil gentleman with a face mask on? It's just so left field. Newt Nightmare attacks Patroclus, but Pyrrha stops him. Then she channels the evil energy that I guess she was collecting with Tira, and a fight ensues between evil Pyrrha and Nightmare, and surprise, she wins. Nightmare disappears. Patroclus can't stand the sight of his sister being malfested and leaves. Evil Pyrrha alone turns to Tira for support. Patroclus was shocked that Pyrrha was malfested. Patroclus goes back to Schwarzwind, Siegfried's group of mercenaries that he left earlier to tell him about Dumas and his sister. Now, are you still following? And I wouldn't blame you if you're not, because this isn't told very well, and I have a hard time explaining it all. Half of all the prudent information is inside the art book. And I'm all for games as art, just like the last episode we talked about Shadow of the Colossus. But this is ridiculous. So, back to the dumb story. Patroclus gets to the gate and tells Zwei Badass that Dumas turned to Nightmare. And Sway forces Patroclus into a fight. Now pause. This is the first time we're using Sway in the story. He is a new character. There is no tutorial on this character, and he has a very unique fighting style that is difficult to use because of Patroclus' fighting style. The main style used for the majority of the story so far does not translate to Zwei. And this game makes this a very easy fight. However, Patroclus has an internal revelation that in which he has a cathartic moment with the spirit of Soul Calibur, which comes in the form of his mother, Sophidia. And at this point, in episode 12, the game decides to throw a wrench at you for no particular reason and give Patroclus a different fighting style. This game has 20 episodes in its story mode, and in the 12th episode, 60% of the game, of the story mode already in, we're going to learn something new. It's a very difficult to use fighting style. And it gives it to you with no tutorial nonetheless. Using this style, this new style, you fight Zwei, and Patroclus is reinvigorated with a new vigor. He keeps hallucinating and getting visions from the spirit of Soul Calibur. He is told he has to resurrect it. So he goes back to Ivy, who told him this earlier. And then we battle Ivy. She decides to tell us what we need to resurrect the Soul Calibur. And to revive it, he needs to get a hold of two other sacred treasures. One is called the Kali Yuga, and the other the Dapar Yuga. And once again, this is important because previous entries of the series highlighted why these treasures were so necessary to the plot. However, the game just proceeds to gloss over it and also introduce 3 new Asian characters in Europe who just happen to be in the same city, who also happen to have the sacred treasures. After beating the Asian fighters, Ivy creates a ritual to revive Soul Calibur. So I don't know what happens next, but I guess Patroclus goes with Schwarzwind to the battlefield, where Pyrrha tears into the astral world where souls are. And the setting is a castle siege where soldiers and monsters are fighting around. We fight Pyrrha, and then we get some weird end cards when we kill her, almost as if the credits roll. I guess time passes for a while before the rest of the story continues. I'm not entirely sure because it comes across as a time lapse, but I can't tell. So on the battlefield, Zwei Badass finds Nightmare. So the next character we use is Zwei for a few battles to try him out again, this time on a slightly harder difficulty curve. And then we have to fight Nightmare. And this is where the game takes a huge difficulty spike, like an absurd spike happens here. Also, Zwei hates Nightmare. But why? Because there is no established history within the two characters in this game. The rivalry or revenge hasn't been established, but the game assumes you understand it already. So, several game overs later, Because of this difficulty spike out of nowhere, we defeat Nightmare. And surprise, surprise, Pyrrha, who happens to be around the corner, takes the soul edge out of the fallen Nightmare. So now as Pyrrha, you defeat Patroclus, and using magic, Patroclus allows Pyrrha to revert, but in the process has to face with the spirit of Soul Calibur, who has the form of Patroclus' mom, Sophia. And you fight the spirit, and you beat the spirit. It took me an hour at the end, and I had to lower the difficulty because why is there a difficulty spike? You also fight the hardest boss of story mode using the new fighting style, which has hardly been used. It is infuriating that this was the direction of the story mode. So the weird part of story mode is that they destroy Soul Calibur using Soul Edge. And it kind of insinuates sort of that Soul Edge was a good guy. And yep, that's it. That's the story. And I have serious critiques about the story. The first problem is how the story is portrayed. There are some cutscenes, but they are like 20% of the story itself. The other 80% are storyboards. There are multiple reasons for this, and one of the reasons would be that producer Daishi Odashiman has gone on record to say that the story mode is only a fourth of what was actually planned. Most critics noticed the absurd story mode right off the bat, and it quickly became apparent that Soul Calibur 5 story was outsourced to CyberConnect 2. And who is CyberConnect 2? Well, believe it. That's right. They're the ones that made the insane amount of Naruto games. The Ultimate Ninja and Ninja Storm series. I personally don't like those games at all. I did enjoy Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 3, but I have other issues with that game. The problem with the Naruto games is who knows when the anime is ending. It's gone on to Boruto. So the story of those games is stunted, and you never get a real resolution. And I don't know if that somehow bled into Soul Calibur 5, but when I first heard the development of this game, I wasn't worried. Partially because what was Asura's Wrath? Asura's Wrath is one of my favorite games ever. Asura's Wrath plays like an anime. There are episodes that flesh out the story, and the game itself is stylistically like an anime, with anime-like dialogue. Asura's Wrath did have some drawbacks, but between the Hack series, the Naruto series, and Asura's Wrath, I can't help but think that this was not the right studio for the story. And I don't put the blame entirely on CyberConnect 2. The game shipped this way. Clearly, other corners were cut. The producer, Daishi, has also said that the original concept for the story was to have all the characters have an individual story modes with them intertwining. The way the story is made up, though, that makes sense. The biggest grief with the story is the presentation. There are some cutscenes here and there, and they're during some important parts, but they have reused assets. It seems like there are 3 levels that have rendered cutscenes, and those are the city on fire in the beginning, that stays on fire for as long as this game is. It's constantly on fire. The bridge of Schwarzwind, and the final castle scene during the siege. I believe each one of these areas has up to 2 cutscenes, and there are 20 episodes, so that is about 6 cutscenes for 20 episodes. The rest of the story is told in storyboards. And for you that don't know what storyboards are, they're essentially rough concept art windows that show specific scenes. Storyboards are usually used in films and games to show where scenes will transition with different kind of ideas that can't be shown on the screen. Sometimes in fighting and anime games, characters' avatars will appear with some kind of text or speech that isn't there. What is here, though, is some voice acting over the storyboards that just use the fade transition. Even if Project Soul ran out of time or money, it comes across as so lazy. However, what is told in the story is told without explanation. Such examples would be Voldo in the forest, Astaroth in the forest, Patroclus and Pyrrha's childhood, how Patroclus and Pyrrha got into the situations that they're currently in, Zway's hatred for Nightmare, Zway's friendship with Viola, the Asian fighters. All the Asian fighters seem completely omitted from the story. The origin of the Malfested and the Malfested's pressure on society Patroclus killing people, T-Rex presence, Patroclus' new fighting style, how Soul Calibur and how Soul Edge work, Edge Master's cameo, Nightmare's shape-shifting powers, Siegfried's revenge, Ivy randomly appearing in the forest, and lastly, Patroclus being a crappy protagonist. There are so many more examples and a lot more characters that didn't even get a reference, including the guest character Ezio. The story ends, and that's it. At the time of recording, Soul Calibur 6 isn't released. It is coming out later this year, so I don't know what the future of the story of the franchise will be. Personally, I would love to see it rebooted or go back in time a la Mortal Kombat 9. A fragmented story mode aside, how's the rest of the game? Well, it feels like it lacks features. Arcade mode is not 8 battles, I believe it's 5. There's a Legendary Souls mode, which is actually really fun, and you fight some classic enemies in this order. You fight Kilik, Siegfried, Nightmare, Cervantes, Edgemaster, who is a new character, Elysium, the last boss of story mode, and Algo, who was the last boss of the last game. It's a very cool mode, but the problem with this mode is that it's extremely difficult. So unless you're an absolute master, then you just won't advance. There is an online mode, which is actually really cool. So check this out. There's the Global Coliseum, where your avatar can hang out, chat, and challenge people, which is a neat concept, something that other fighting games eventually will do. There's also rooms for different parts of the world, titles for your fighters. You can also see fighters' online stability connections. Honestly, looking back at it, it's pretty robust. I recently went back to it and saw how empty it was, but it still seems that 6 years later, after release, there's still some people on it. There's not a lot of people, but hey, more power to you. Also, I'm pretty sure the servers are going to shut down soon. There's also ranked matches, but I always felt like those really did not matter. And now the best part of playing online, and it sucks that I can't really get footage of that now, but it is when you get online and you fight a ridiculous looking original character. The game has an extreme in-depth character creator mode, largely borrowed from Soul Calibur 5, but improved upon in almost every way. This character creator lets you choose male or female, body type, it has limited voices though. There was a smart decision to make all the clothes unisex, which makes for ridiculous combinations of clothes. It gives the opportunity to make the women not just be half-dressed or skimpily clad women, and also gives the men ridiculous clothing. That is a welcome refresher because Soul Calibur's fashion choices with women, except for Hilda, is mostly tight clothing or short skirts. Except for Ivy, who just needs to have her vagina, buttocks, and nipples covered in purple, and apparently that's fine. It's an incredibly robust creator though. This character creator is extremely impressive with what you can do as well as how you can manipulate it. That's what makes parts of this game mediocre. You can see where there was more tender love and care, there could be a stronger community that would have supported this game. Games as a service is something that is ubiquitous with almost any new game that releases with some kind of online engagement or gameplay. And I can't help but feel that if this game was released 2 years later, it would have found its own little niche to fill. So what about the sword fighting? Is the game any good? I've played Soul Calibur 2, 3, 4, and 5. My favorite gameplay is 5. I do have some quids about it, but they aren't too bad. Looking back at the games, I can see why people love some of the previous ones. And I think the one I like the least would be Soul Calibur 4 because of the armor system and how some of the finishers worked. Those got transferred into this game, but it's a lot more refined. And that's the key word, refined. R-E-F-I-N-D. To break it down, the weapons-based fighting game for the most part remains unchanged. The game introduced a lot of new characters though. Lexia, Dampierre carried over from the PSP Soul Calibur, Edgemaster, Elysium, Natsu, Patroclus, Pyrrha, Viola, Jiba, Aeon Calcos, and Zwei. A total of 12 characters. Out of those 12 characters, 2 are randomizers. Out of those 10 characters, 6 are character replacements, with the remaining being totally new characters. Some characters do need an asterisk, though. So going over some of the newer characters, let's see. This was Dampierre's first foray into a mainline Soul Calibur game, so I count him as a new character. Dampierre is one of the worst characters in the game, though, because his stats are noticeably lower than everybody else's. He has an accidental fighting style with hidden daggers in his wrists and feet. By accidentally fighting, I mean that he comes across as a bumbling idiot. However, it is stated that Dampierre is a master thief with an untraceable history, so most of it looks like it could be done on purpose, but he comes across as an idiot. Zwei, one of my favorite new characters, he's a badass. He uses a spirit wolf with a tri-handled sword, so he can hold it in 3 different positions with either arm. And he has some affinity to the moon based on his moon tattoo and the art. He also has a brief with Graf, Dumas, and Nightmare. Viola, who uses a crystal ball and a claw hand to attack, she's cool but difficult to use or master. And her character, at least to me, comes across as lame. She travels with Zwei sometimes, I guess. Lexia, the daughter of a previous Soul Calibur character, Zhang Hua, she uses the Chinese sword and she has similar fighting styles to Zhang Hua. Natsu, a disciple of Taki, is a ninja, and she uses some of the same moveset and a similar weapon to Taki, and she also has a demon inside of her. Jiba, who uses Killick's fighting style, uses a Kali Yuga. He also really likes food. Patroclus uses his sword and shield similar to his mother, except he's pretty aggressive with his sword and shield in a way that his mother wasn't. Aeon Calcos. This is crazy. So this is Lizardman. And Lizardman has been a regular character of the series for a while. However, in this game, he gets completely worked. He gets 2 axes and wings and can breathe fire. It's an extreme makeover Lizard edition. It was rumored that part of the reason for the rework was because originally they wanted to have Kratos from the God of War franchise as a guest character, but they could not get him either in time or communications broke down. Ezio, the guest character from Assassin's Creed franchise, he's actually pretty well balanced. He's fun to use and feels like very appropriate. I hope they bring him back one day. Edgemaster, Master Swordsman, who is a character randomizer for all the characters. Elysium, a character randomizer for the female characters. And Killick was a random character randomizer for all male characters. The rest of the character roster is returning characters like Siegfried, Nightmare, Tira, Astros, etc. It feels a bit lackluster because why these characters fight just isn't properly illustrated in the game. So we have our fighters with almost every single one having a radically different fighting style or weapon from the last. I've been playing Overwatch for a while now, and Overwatch has its dirty hooks in me, and not just me but some of my close friends. I normally do not like shooters because the actual first-person view is somewhat boring. It's a heads-up display. It usually has your gun or weapon. Overwatch has that. Overwatch has special abilities and objective-based goals, though. It isn't just shooting. Not all characters can win in a straight-up firefight, and this is why I love the most amount of characters with widely different abilities. It doesn't make it clear which character can win. That's why I feel when I play Soul Calibur 5. It feels almost like a class fighter. You have warriors using their weapons, have short, long, or medium range. You have heavy, medium, and light fighters. The ability to counter, heal, grabs, agility. There are also many different combinations of characters with weapons and abilities. It feels almost like a class fighter, and personally wish that Soul Calibur would take this direction. A lot of fighters use their fists for fighting, so different games in the fighting genre just tend to have different animations with some kind of power or supernaturalness to them. That is a stark contrast to Soul Calibur, which have totally different animations compared to other fighters. You have a ring blade, huge swords, axes, spears, shields, regular swords, swords with gun, double axes, a spirit wolf, a glowing orb, hidden knife, effing nunchucks. It's actually insane how many different fighting styles there are and how well animated they are. So how are the actual mechanics in the game? Like other fighting games, you have a health bar, and the point of the match is to reduce your opponent's life down to 0. That much is certain. Soul Calibur is unique in the sense that you can move around all the stage. Some of the stages have ring outs, some of the stages are completely enclosed. All characters use their weapons of varying range. The main mechanics of this game is a 4-button layout, and you have A, which is horizontal attacks, B, which is vertical attacks, K, which is kicks, and G, which is guarding and blocking. There are also throws. Horizontal attacks can be high or low. They can be countered by jumping, ducking, or guarding. Vertical attacks tend to move up or down, can be either blocked or sidestepped. Kicks can vary and fall somewhere in between those two. Throws can also be used to counter guarding. You can already see almost a rock, paper, scissors kind of system. Throws also change and vary depending on what angle you grab from. Lastly, there are also some focus attacks that are either unblockable or break your opponent's guard. And that is basic Soul Calibur. Every game since Soul Edge has more or less abided by these mechanics and tried to improve them or change them in one way or another. Soul Calibur 5 differs in some key ways. Some are great for the series, others felt weird. So what makes Soul Calibur 5 different from its predecessors and its competition? Well, a couple of things. The following systems are the Critical Edge, Brave Edge, Guard Impact, Just Guard, and the Quick Step. So what is unique about these? Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty mechanics of it. Soul Calibur 4 introduced the Soul Gauge system. It was a system that more or less determined when your character was about to get stunned or when armor would break. The Critical Gauge replaces it but doesn't actually have the same function at all. The orb still represents your guard level with the red blinking translating to a complete stun. What is new and next to the orb is the gauge itself. The gauge itself can fill up to 200%. At 100% you can do your special, your character's critical edge. At 50% you can do the brave edge, which is like a specialty EX move, and at 25% you can do a guard break. The gauge itself fills up while the fight continues as you block and attack successfully in a match. The person who will lose in one round will usually get an additional 100% gauge. It's like a comeback mechanic. Critical Edge is basically an ultra combo or rage art. It's the character special, to put it simply. It is a string of hits or even a throw. It's very cool, super flashy. The one I hate the most is Yoshimitsu because it has a low attack and takes almost 60% of your health. They aren't all heavy damage dealers. Some are just combo extenders or combo enders. Brave Edge are special empowered attacks. There is a glow to your character when you do these moves. They usually can break guards. These attacks can also be grabs or a small string of combos. Some of the character's classic moves have become Brave Edge moves, and Guard Impact which has been a classic feature in Soul Calibur games. It usually was a forward guard or a backward guard, but this game has decided to remove that. Now if you guard and press the appropriate button, you can do a guard impact, which is like the EX version of a guard. Unfortunately, this uses the soul gauge, which makes it very limited in its use. Other characters have guard impacts built into some of their moves. This kind of makes this version of guard impact feel somewhat useless because of the cost. And because the cost feels high and it can be countered, it doesn't feel as impactful as other previous entries. The next mechanic is the Just Guard. It's one that sounds cool, but I'm not very fond of it. You have to guard in the frame prior to the framing where a move makes contact with your character. This results in your character glowing blue and blocks the attack. This can also block unblockable attacks. This kind of guard requires extreme precision and knowledge of the game. This kind of guard has no drawbacks and no cost. Theoretically, you can absolutely block every attack in the game. It's just extremely difficult. The quick step is my new favorite mechanic. By tapping up or down twice, you can quickly sidestep and move to the side. This has no cost. It's just an evasive maneuver. It's really smooth and it feels like it accelerates the combat. All these mechanics and systems combined actually make for some of the most fluid combat the series has had up to date. The critical edges are simple to perform, the sidestep really helps speed up the combat, and if an opponent breaks a guard, it feels right. In my opinion, this has been the best Soul Calibur gameplay since the second game. I personally wish the environments were a bit more destructible though. WTF. Literally, what the fuck? Why couldn't this game be better? The lack of foresight that went into the making of this game bothers me way too much, and it really does hinder me when I play it. I think about it almost constantly when I'm playing this game. The legacy this game leaves behind is the motivation for Bandai or Namco to make a Soul Calibur 6 and the fans' hunger for a better Soul Calibur that keeps some of these mechanics but also goes back to its roots. Anyway, that's it. Not a long show for today. This is particularly because of content of this game. You can extend that argument a bit to fighting games because their assets aren't as big as some other more open world games. That being said, fighting games have never looked more beautiful, and I love living in this age. I'll see you on the next episode. Not sure when I'm going to do that next. It'll be sometime next month probably. But I love doing this show so far, and I hope you enjoy.